All right, guys, here's the moment. A little nervous, though I really shouldn't be. I'm about to cut the axle off of my 8.8 so that I can fit my new axle tubes into place. All right, guys, so as you know, I'm using an 8.8 axle underneath the third gen. The old glass jaw of an Australian 9-bolt just won't cut it. So I got an 8.8 out of an Explorer, and after measuring everything and figuring out which bearing or after figuring out which bearing ends I want to use and brakes, I determined that the axle tube on the one side unfortunately was not long enough. And this is because the 8.8 in the Explorer uses one long, one short axle, passenger to driver side. So what I did was I ordered some 4130 chromoly steel tubing, 3-inch, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut it off close to the center section, and I'm going to push these tubes in and then weld them to the old existing tubes. I measured the inside of the tube where I'm going to insert this into, and it's roughly 2.858, something like that. So I've got a piece of 3-inch tube here on the lathe. Got it mounted up with my steady rest in a live center, and I'm basically going to turn down the 3-inch here so my OD will fit the ID of the 8.8. And then from there I'll weld on the Mosier bearing ends, the flush mount GM style one, so I could put on my LS rear brake setup from a 4th gen, and this all should work out. So the idea here is if I turn this down, I can get it to fit inside the housing. That way I don't have a bunch of weld joints along the axle tubes, and theoretically it should be stronger. I need to weld the axle tube to the center section anyway for strength, since they're only plug welds. But since I have the large lathe here, I'm going to turn this thing down and hopefully be able to make a real nice rear axle. All right, there it is. One end of the tube narrowed down, 2.860. Even put a little chamfer here on the edge and a little angle there, because this is where I'm going to weld to. So the axle still isn't cut the length, but I wanted that extra length because I'm not sure exactly how far I'm going to be able to get this into the housing. I'm going to try to go the full distance, but I wanted some wiggle room on the other end so I can get it there. So with this one done, now I have to do the other side. So let me show you guys what I got going on so far. My plan here is I'm going to cut this axle tube off somewhere about here. I'm going to try to leave about a 1/4 inch of the old tube in place. That'll give me something to weld my new tubes, which are here. As you can see, I turned these things down, so it measures about 2.86 or so, which is what I measured from the inside, is the inside of this axle tube, you know, wedged into there. I know I'm going to have to do a little bit of grinding and stuff because there is a cold weld seam here. I don't know if you can see it on the camera, but right here, just so I can get the inside to be all even. But my plan is there, I'm going to cut this off. We're going to fit those in so they get inserted into here, weld them all the way around, and then weld the remaining tube to the housing, because these are prone to shear off the little plug welds there. And I'm going to do it to both sides. That way I can get the exact axle tube length I want for the right axles, because I'm trying to maintain the same axle width of the axle that was in there. I do have new axle tube ends that are going to go onto here. So once those are in place, I can take my final measurements from my pinion center line so I know exactly where my flange needs to be for my brakes and my track width. And then I can finally call it Mosier and order my new axles for this with the GM 5 and, what is it, 5 by 4 and a quarter? 5 by 4.5. I'm not sure. I got to look it up again, but that's the plan thus far. So I'm going to get the old death wheel out and I'm going to cut this guy off. Back on the axle here. As you saw last, what I did was I cut off the axle side that was too short, just to make sure that my new axle tubes that I machined down are going to fit in there and everything will work. So I feel way more confident than I did then. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to work on cutting off the other side the same way I did this side. Grind out the seam that's in here so I can get my other tube fit, and then I can use my pinion centerline tool and make sure I get these axles to the correct length. Right now this one is not fully inserted. I wanted to make sure that these things had a nice tight fit. So what I'm going to try to do is, once I have the other side cut out, cleaned up, ready to go, I'm going to put both axle tubes in the same time, and I'm going to probably use my lift to push them down. Because I do have a hydraulic press somewhere back there, but obviously it's not tall enough to be able to fit an axle in there. I want to have a nice tight clearance fit on there just so I know the tubes are in there well, even though I am going to weld them and the old tube to the housing. I wanted to make sure that everything is going to be nice and tight and I don't have to worry about this thing on drag slicks, radials, whatever. I want it to be relatively bulletproof. So that being said, I'm going to grab the death wheel and I'm going to cut off the other side axle tube now, and we'll get all that cleaned up and fit up. Alright, so I've got both sides cut off. As you can see on this side, this is where I ground out for where the seam used to be. And this side still needs it. This is the seam there. I know it's probably a little hard to tell. But there is a seam there. I'm going to have to grind this flat, or at least round, to the tube so I can get the other tube in there. The other thing I'm going to do right now is obviously clean all this off. But I'm going to cut these ears off because I don't need them. I am going to plug this hole. I'm going to make a plug for this so I can bolt it on and plug it in case I want to use the reluctor ring that's in here down the road. I might be able to use it for traction control or drive speed or something like that. I don't know. I want to keep that option open just in case. The other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to remove the drain plug here, well, the fill plug I should say, because once I weld my brackets on, I can't get to this. So I want to make sure that I clean these threads really well on both the plug and the case, and then I'm going to seal these things so nothing's going to leak now or ever. I've already knocked out the seal and the bearing race for the pinion here, but basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to get all this rust scale off, and to do that I'm going to use my favorite tool here, the needle scaler. Scaler, I don't know exactly what it's called, but this thing uses compressed air, and all these little rods will bounce out and chip away all this rust scale so that I have a nice clean surface. I can then wire brush it and clean this thing up really well. Currently over there I've got my ultrasonic cleaner heating up. I'm going to throw this guy in there so that I can make sure all my seams in between here are nice and clean. All the dirt and crap that's inside the housing still from years of service will get cleaned out, and then we'll start fitting on the tubes here to make this thing a new axle. So the torque arm mount is a bunch of different pieces here. This is it. Get it from a guy on eBay. He sells you all these pieces, all pre-laser cut. Pretty simple instructions to put it together. But according to these things, I need to basically rough it together, fit it to the housing, grind it where it needs to be to make sure it is close to the housing as possible. So that's what I'm going to do now. I'm going to start tack welding this thing together. That way, if anything is off, I can just cut the tack welds. The things I've done so far is I've ground off the little coating that comes on a lot of the steel when you buy it. So you need to grind that away so you get a good penetrating weld. I have everything squared off here. And I'm going to just start assembling it the way the instructions show. So 1, 2, 3, 4. And then we'll fit it to the housing that's currently cleaning. Alright guys, so another day, still working on the mount for the 8/8 axle. I've got pretty much the whole mount fitted really well to the differential housing itself. In the instructions, it basically says to try to get it to fit as nice as possible so you have the best possible welds. So you got to kind of grind some things on both the metal that make up the mount and the differential itself, so everything fits well. So I've pretty much got that. What I did also was drill all the holes in my differential and the mount at the same time so I could relocate it where it worked best. But now I'm basically gonna just finish weld everything on the inside of the mount and the mount itself so that I can finalize it onto the differential. So let me show you guys what I've got so far. So here's the completed mount, and you can see right now I've got to do all my finish welds where all the plates go. I've got some of the other stuff sort of welded on the outside, just kind of tacked into place. I did go ahead and I drilled through for a lot of my mounting locations already. You can see my 1/2-inch hole that goes through here. So like things like this, I'll put a little countersink on there so I could stress relieve it. Now, I'll do it to all these as well so I don't have to worry about any cracks in the future. But right now what I'm going to do is I'm going to TIG together the entire mount inside as well for strength, and then I can give this guy a final cleaning and start welding it to this. This is going to be the more difficult thing to weld to because this is, you know, cast steel, cast iron, some kind of weird mixture. This is mild steel. So, you know, I've seen a couple of contradicting things using something like a nickel filler rod to weld this to that. But you do have to both preheat and post-heat the cast so you don't get any cracks. So that's an added challenge in itself. I did see some people that had a lot of good luck when it came to welding the axle tubes to the housing. A lot of people like to use like a stainless steel rod or the nickel rod. So, you know, I have both. We're gonna just start welding it and see what works the best. But for now, I'm just gonna weld the mount fully together, so that's good. And then I can get it installed onto the differential. Alright guys, so I got the mount here all welded up, all ground down smooth as per the instructions. I TIG welded this entire thing. Some of the areas where after I ground it were low spots, I just went over again with TIG weld, filled it all up, so I know I got a nice thick heavy weld. And it also looks really good now. A couple of things I want to make mention of before I go to install this thing on the center section is you have to make sure that you put in your drain plug and seal it up really good, because it's going to be behind the mount and there's no way to get to that plug when you weld this new mount onto place. Now, I'm not worried about being able to fill my differential from that location because the differential cover I bought has a fill plug in it already. So let me show you what I've got here so far. So all my holes I showed you were already drilled, but everything is welded, everything is ground smooth, and I now have my drain plug installed with thread sealant, and it is tightened down. I also went ahead and I threaded the old speed sensor hole and put a pipe plug in there as well. This one's loose, but I'm not sure if I'm going to try to use the ABS tone ring for any kind of input or signal that I may or may not be able to use, but I didn't want to weld this shut for two reasons. One, again, this is cast steel. I don't want to try to weld a giant hole. And two, in case I do want to use that sensor down the road. So until I have this thing fully built and together, I don't want to close that hole up permanently. So right now I'm at the stage where I'm going to put this on for its last time. I'm going to bolt everything into place, tighten it up, and then I'm going to go over the area where I'm going to weld it one more time, make sure everything is nice and clean. It doesn't have any of the steel coating. I forget what this is called, but you need to grind this away from anywhere you're going to be welding to. So same thing here. I'm going to make sure everything is nice and clean. I don't have any rust build up in the pits or anything, and I'm going to weld this thing on. Alright, so I got my plate bolted back into place. I currently have a heat gun in here just to try to heat the entire case up, because I want it to be roughly around 300 degrees Fahrenheit. I want the heat in the case to be, close to what it's going to be when I'm welding it. I am going to TIG weld this. I do have a nickel Ni99 rods, which is what a lot of the welding forums and speaking to my local welding shop recommended. I do see a lot of people that use a special stainless steel alloy. I also have that rod. I might try that if I don't like the way the nickel rod is working. But I also have here my infrared gun, so I can check to make sure that this thing is about 300 degrees or so. And then I'm going to set up and start TIG welding this. I'm going to try to do it in small sections, and as soon as I take the torch away, I'm going to grab my needle descaler and I'm going to essentially peen that weld to try to release some of the stress that may be in there. I'm going to leave the heat gun in there for the entirety of this weld, just to make sure that it stays warm and even, and I can use that to slowly cool down the entire cast iron assembly, so I don't have to worry about cracks. Alright, so got my oxygen acetylene torch here. This guy's already getting kind of warm, but I'm gonna heat up this assembly, especially in the area where I'm welding, as well as I can. Currently, with just the heat gun, I'm looking at about 150, 160, 200. It depends on where I shine this thing. But I want to make sure I have some nice even heat as I go around. So let's get the torch fired up here. So heating this thing is going to do a couple of things. It's going to draw out any of the impurities that are in the cast iron, as well as any of the moisture left behind. So I'm just going to heat around this thing, nice and even like. About 300 degrees there already. All right, got my nickel rod here. I'm gonna set up to get comfortable. Before I start, let's check our temperature. Depending on where I go, it's about 220, 260. Let's just warm that up again one more time. Try this out. Alright, there's my weld. Flowed really nice. Now we'll shot peen it a bit. What this does is it actually relieves a lot of the stress within the weld. Still about 290 degrees. So from there, I'm going to move down. I'll maybe do this little area here to maybe another inch, inch and a half. Then I'll move over here, do a little more there, and just keep working my way around without trying to put too much heat in any one area. So let's see what the temperature is here. About 200 degrees or so. Add a little more heat there. Alright guys, so far so good. I'm liking the way this nickel rod is welding. So I'm just going to keep on going on. I'm just going to keep working my way around and doing little areas at a time. And, you know, until I get this thing fully welded up. Alright, so that went way better than I had expected. I was real nervous about it, wanting to crack or make some kind of funny noises, but I basically just made sure it was 300 or above, TIG welded a small area, and then right away hit it with the needle scaler to peen it. And I didn't hear any kind of creaking or cracking, anything funny. All the welds look great. So basically right now what I'm going to do is pulled off the differential bearing caps. I've got those in my ultrasonic cleaner to clean those up. And since I don't have axle tubes on this guy, I'm going to throw it in the ultrasonic cleaner as well, because I did sandblast a couple areas. I want to make sure this thing is clean. From there, I'm going to see if I can get my axle tubes in and start turning this thing into a solid rear axle again. All my welds, they came out pretty good. Everything looks nice. I don't have any kind of weird cracking. It is still warm. I did let it cool off nice and slow. You know, I kept the heat gun in there and just monitored the temperature as it was cooling off. But everything looks pretty good. This thing should be plenty strong now. And well, I mean, it's definitely got to be stronger than what I had. I mean, little tiny axle there, that wouldn't have survived. So, like I said, I've got my axle tubes here. This is 4130 chromoly steel. I turned them down on the lathe, so these will fit in the cut-off axle tubes that were originally here on the 8.8. I ground down the weld that was there, and we'll try to get these things in. Like I said, though, the next step is I'm going to take this whole assembly once it cools off completely, and I'm going to throw it in the ultrasonic cleaner to clean out.